Hello to everyone who's interested in launching and scaling great online products. I'm Jordan Calderon, and today we are here with Alexi Semeny, the CEO and founder of devteam.space.
Hey guys.
And we have a very special guest today.
Very
We have
special.
John Greathouse. Say hi, John.
Welcome, welcome. Welcome to UCSB, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So John
you.
has held numerous senior executive positions at successful startups over the past 15 years, some including Computer Motion and Citrix. He was one of the first employees hired, as he has brought many of these companies from the ground up with his expertise. Two of his companies actually reached an IPO during John's time at the company. Today, he's a partner at Rincon Venture Partners, a venture capital firm investing in early-stage web-based companies. He's also a professor in the Technological Management Program at UC Santa Barbara, and he is an advisor and board member at many tech companies. So John, can you tell us and the community just a little bit of how you got into the realm that you're in today?
Wow. So I think you're either born an entrepreneur or not. I think you can teach entrepreneurs, but I don't think you can teach somebody to be an entrepreneur. So I was in that mold as a kid, like just always doing entrepreneurial stuff, to the point of even irritating my parents, who both of whom worked for the government, and so they just couldn't quite understand like why was I out in the front yard selling stuff all the time and doing crazy things. So I was always an entrepreneur, but I sort of like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. It took me a while to figure that out. I ended up working directly for the owner of a software company, and he became my mentor. I've only had two real mentors in my life. He was one of them, and that allowed me to see all aspects of the software industry. What I realized, and what he basically pushed me out of the nest, because he said, John, look, this is a small company. It was sub 5 million in revenue. It's a small business. I own 100% of it. There's bigger things in your future. Like as much as I'd love for you to stay here, you really should do something else. So at that time, I was just about.
That was good of him.
It was really good of him. I sometimes get emotional. I've gotten better. I used to get emotional when I would tell that story, because it was almost like your parent. It was almost like a parent saying you need to leave home, right? Knowing that I never saw him again. See, I can say that without crying now. I never saw the man again. I tried to a couple times when I went through St. Louis. It just
Destiny thing.
never worked out. But you got to admit that that is a pretty admirable thing to do
Absolutely,
for a young
yeah.
person.
Yeah.
I met a PhD from UCSB, and he was a roboticist, and he had pulled together at that time about 7 or 8 roboticists from. There was a center on campus, and they'd pulled themselves off campus, and they were building robots for the government, and they had built some very impressive robots, including one that was a prototype for the arm that was used on the shuttle to bring satellites in. So when the
Wow. That's really frontier, right?
it was total back then. I mean, now it would be archaic, right? This was
Yes.
1993, but it was
Still.
at that time. We argued that we had one of the world's most sophisticated robots because of the numbers of degrees of freedom. Every degree of freedom you add to a robot increases the complexity exponentially. So we had a very complex robot that we had built, and it was in the shape of an arm. And so what we ended up doing I came up on the company just at the right time for them and the right time for me. A friend of mine said, hey, you should meet Dr. Yulin Wang. And I pictured like this ancient, like 90-year-old, like bent over professor, roboticist. And I walked into, and I wore a suit, which is so funny. I mean, I think I've worn a tie twice in 20 years.
Yeah.
But I had a suit on, and I went to, they were in this little area that later became a sandwich shop. It was this tiny little space in the Kmart shopping center. So it wasn't like I walked up to this building. It was like, oh my God, look at this great company. So I kind of walked in, and I'm like,
Where are you guys?
Right, yeah.
Where's the
it, right?
entry?
So I walked up and I said, hi, I'm here to see Dr. Wong. And he comes out. He's about my age. He's 1 year older than me. So he's about 30. He has on like a tank top, board shorts, and flip-flops. And I'm like, okay, so much for Dr. Yulin Wong.
That's like from like a doctor from the anime movie.
Yeah, yeah. So I just was, I don't know, it just felt right. So we ended up talking. Someone came in there, our vendor had come in there that had ripped them off basically for their telephone system. And she was coming in that day to sign the agreement. And Yulin's like, hey, do you think you could talk to this woman? And I'm like, sure. I looked at the agreement, and I could see that she was taking advantage of these people. So I knocked a bunch of money off the bill. And And we just kind of said at the time, he goes, I don't really know. He didn't know about Wharton. He didn't know what a CPA was. All this was great, right?
Oh, wow.
Because I came from a world of East Coast, especially back then, was very status driven. Like, oh, what school did you go to? You know, and all this. What'd your parents do? And all this crap. So I liked coming to California because none of that mattered. It was, what can you do for us? I don't care about your pedigree. And so I proved myself right off the bat that I could do something for them. And and he said, I'm not sure what you can do, but why don't you join us and we'll see how it goes. And that was our joke for 7 years. I just kept finding things to do. Ended up being able to run, generated a lot of the revenue for many of the years, ran business development, did things like that.
Yeah, so what were your specific positions?
Yeah, well, my title, I don't even think it ever changed. But no, it did change because when we went public, I didn't want the CFO title. So I had CFO, and I think I was vice president of strategic development or business development or something like that.
Citrix, formerly known as Expert City, created software as a service products such as GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, and GoToTraining. Kind of like a one-stop shop for internal business operations.
Yep.
And I'm aware that Citrix spent about $10 million on the website building and kind of AWS services that were created
pre AWS.
Pre AWS,
yeah.
but now actually Amazon AWS, you could do it for maybe $100, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
So I mean, it's just kind of crazy to see how these product development changes have, evolved over a period of time. So I'd like to kind of get your insight on how all these different practices have changed over time and what it basically means for these companies.
Yeah, I think entrepreneurs today don't realize the advantages they have, and they don't need to. It just, it's not even worth going back and reading about how lucky you are, because in 2000 and 2005 when we were doing these things, I had a lot of advantages that somebody in 1990 didn't have. So, but it was really rudimentary. The internet was the Wild West, and we were one of the few companies, because we had the bubble, right? You guys all know about the bubble, and then the crash. We had $30 million in the bank.
Nice.
We raised a ton of money. I think we raised $34 million at $80 million pre, with zero revenue. We had no revenue, but we had $80 million valuation.
Just in case, at what time you joined the company?
I was one of the first business people, so I joined in 1999.
So the product was already in development, or you joined before the product?
So it's a longer story, but I'll tell it quickly. So the original piece of software was built by Klaus Schauser and two of his PhD students here at UC Santa Barbara, and it allowed you to move mouse clicks and pixels quickly and securely over the internet. It was a very fundamental little piece of software, very powerful, and it allowed you to do it irrespective of the device. So you could be talking a Sun workstation, could talk to another Unix platform, could talk to an Apple, could talk to a PC, which doesn't surprise you when you think about it. Was created in a university setting, right?
Yeah,
because they're device agnostic. We had it. I helped. No, I'll take that back. This is before I got there. So Klaus basically had a verbal agreement to sell that little piece of code for $1 million. And this is not uncommon. I've written about the $1 million offer, where a lot of times when you're first getting going, you get the least little bit of traction. A bigger company will come in and say, "Hey, we'll buy that," and it's almost always $1 million per founder. It's like, there's
magic
three
number.
of you. How about three? Which sounds like a lot and is a lot if it depends on your stage of life, but after taxes and everything else, it's not a ton of money.
Yeah.
Right? So Klaus was brave, and he said no. And here he was, a professor, and could have used the money. And he said, no, I don't, I'm not going to take that offer. And so we ended up raising money from a couple great VCs. One of them wanted us to use the software to create a marketplace of services, and that's where the name Expert City came from.
Gotcha.
So instead of selling the software, we were using the software. We were letting experts around the world use the software to fix problems on other people's computers. The problem with that, it was like a lot of dot-bomb ideas. It was not a bad idea, and there are people doing it today. If you Google it, you'll find it. But it was almost impossible to make money doing that. We were making fractions of a penny on each transaction, and we were paying a lot to get each transaction, marketing-wise. So I ended up selling the software because people just started calling me and saying, listen, I've heard about your Expert City thing, and that sounds cute, but I need it for my call center. How do I buy it? And I don't like telling people they can't. I don't like saying no. I don't like saying you can't buy it. So I kept a list, and I ended up getting about 12 companies that had called me or emailed me and said, how do I get your software? And we weren't selling it. We were doing this in marketplace, right?
Yeah.
I was a CFO, and I was running all of biz dev and sales, and I'm like, I know I had one hand on the money bag, right? And I had the other hand out, and this hand was not getting any money. And I knew that if we kept free falling, we were gonna be like every other dot bomb. We were just gonna go away. And so I started licensing our technology to call centers. Cox Communications was one of our first big customers. Within a year, we had Oracle, we had SAP, we had all these big companies
Great.
because it was a great tool to provide customer support.
So can you please
And that
share?
you didn't even mention that product, but that was our first product. It was called It was called something else, but it became Go Assist.
Okay.
And we built our business on the foundation of that revenue, which ended up being a multi-$100 million product.
Nice.
But nobody has even heard of it because it's not sexy, it's not consumer, right? It's in call centers. Who cares?
Yeah.
So can you just share like how you interacted with the product team in terms of like,
Oh my
you know,
God.
all of a sudden you coming to them and saying like, you know what, I have a list of companies who want to license it.
It was
And
literally the
how
most
was that?
stressful time in my professional life. No, it was. It split the company in two. We
Yeah.
became Red Team, Blue Team. We became Expert City Team, and the name of the product was Desktop Streaming. So we became the Desktop Streaming guys versus the Expert City guys.
Can you just share a little bit more on basically like on building this product? Did you plan out the actual, you know, like the budget allocation and then like let's say, because again, like if you devote a certain period of time for building a particular product, then again, like that's a lot of companies doing this mistake that they think they're gonna make it in 6 months,
Yeah.
and then like a week later they can do the marketing push, right? Or they
Yeah.
can go and sell it. But in reality, it's not like that. You
No.
need to have a time buffer between the product release and the product launch on the marketplace, and
Yep.
then you need to make sure that you actually have the safety buffer in terms of finances. Because if you're thinking of 6 months,
Yep.
but what's in reality is gonna take up to 9 months or even more. So, and all of that kind of really affects the first impression of the people who actually gonna end up buying the product.
Right.
So, can you please share a little bit about
Sure.
that? How you managed
Yeah, and I
fix
give
that?
I give credit to Klaus and Brian for this. They did a masterful job of it. So we ended up I talked about how in my prior company, Computer Motion, we were the first to market, and a fast follower ate our lunch, right? Intuitive Surgical ate our lunch. In this case, we got to do the opposite. So the first to market was this really old legacy product called PC Anywhere. It was a box software solution where if you loaded it onto your computer at work, which wasn't easy to do, and you loaded it on your computer at home, you could remotely work, sort of. It didn't work great, but it worked. It was a $150 million product. So it wasn't it was significant. So what Brian and Klaus did that was brilliant, to your point, was they said they talked to a lot of people that were using PC Anywhere, and they talked to a lot of people that weren't, and they were trying to figure out why do you use it, and what do you not like about it, and why aren't you using it? Because you said you would use it if it was easier.
Yeah.
And so it came out to be easier to use. That was the number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 reasons people weren't using it. And then when we asked people that were using it, what features do you use? PC Anywhere at that time had been around for over a decade, and it was bloatware. I mean, it just had all these features that nobody used. Like, I can remotely print, and you never do that. Like, you're working from home, you're doing spreadsheets, you're doing Word doc, you're not doing any of that stuff. So like many products over time, it had gotten ridiculously complicated. And so when we went to market, and one of the reasons why we got to market quickly was our MVP. They weren't even using that terminology back then.
Yeah.
But our minimally viable product was Suite. It basically only connected you to a remote PC. That was it.
Nice.
That was it. And it was one click.
Nice.
You didn't have to sit there and go, well, what's the IP address? What's the firewall setting? What's all the crap that you had to do for PC Anywhere. It was like, I want to connect, and it would do all the work for you. And we found that, even years later when we added remote printing and all this other crap, 90% of the people use that one feature.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have to be honest with yourself about, because it's fun to build all these cool features, right? But you have to be honest with yourself about what's the utility of my product, really?
Practical senses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it really was simple.
Kind of dive into your time at Rincon Venture Partners. Just
Oh,
with
yeah.
startup investing, things like that.
Yep.
What would the number one piece of advice and something that you've learned from seeing all these different startups? What's the number one piece of advice you give to somebody trying to start their own company?
Yeah, there's a lot of number ones, right?
It is true.
And just to clarify on Rincon, so we did 3 funds, about 100 million under 3 different funds. It averaged about 30 million, a little bit more than that. 60 some investments, mostly software as a service, so mostly things that I was familiar with. I had the chance to work with a lot of brilliant entrepreneurs, really, really smart people. We sold companies to Apple and Google and some others. But I think that none of these people that I worked with made this mistake. But of the people that would pitch us, of which there was many, I think most common mistake was seeking institutional capital before they had traction, before they had, sometimes even before they had product market fit, and just not understanding how VC works. Like VC, unless you're in the sciences or something, maybe pharmaceuticals or something, VCs don't fund ideas, and we don't fund science projects, and we don't fund whimsical like maybes. Like you need to come to us and say, listen, I bootstrapped, as you mentioned earlier, I bootstrapped the idea to this point. I have some product market fit. I'm not claiming I have it completely figured out. And I have some traction with respect to third parties that you can contact and will tell you why they like my product and why they'll pay for it. That's enough. But a lot of people come to VCs without that. They're like, no, it's a good idea. Like, well, good idea, and $4.95 gets you what, right? Like a latte? Like, it doesn't get you anything. So that probably be the number one. And also, most companies don't need VC money. VC is sort of this, I want to get a venture capitalist on my board, and I've been in VC 14 years, so I think if you can avoid taking institutional capital with your startup, do it.
Gotcha.
Now there's times when it doesn't make sense, right? If you're trying to grow Airbnb and it's a market where first mover makes a big difference, you want to have the capital, clearly.
Exactly.
So I'm not saying it's not one size fits all solution, but more companies than not don't need VC. So maybe they need an angel or two. Maybe they need a strategic, so a corporate partner that can help them into market, but also invest. That can work. There's lots of sources of money, and VC is one of the hardest to get, and probably the most overrated.
Yeah. Very cool.
Well, it's great. So, and I guess the last question would be, what would you advise in terms of the product development and pushing it to the market, not only to startups, but pretty much to any product owner, either if it's a person, a founder in a startup or a small business, maybe like CTO or a large company, product owner or director of the specific line of products. So what kind of advice would you give them?
The one advice, if I did boil it down to one, is don't be dogmatic and be self-aware that you don't have the answers. So like that pricing issue, I always said I don't mind being wrong with my team. I would say, I'm okay. You can bring data to me that shows me I'm wrong. I don't care if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, in quotes, it means I'm one step closer to being right. And so don't turn it into a personal issue. You don't know what features people want until you find out from them. And I think that's probably the single most devastating mistake I've seen product owners make is they start to believe they have the answers. They don't. The customers have the answers, or the prospects have the answers. And your job is to go out there and make sure that you're being a active listener who's self-aware and bring that information filtered, but bring it back to the company in a fair and equitable way, and not just to support what you believe to be true. And I think we had incredible integrity with the Expert City team, where we were quite happy to say, yeah, remember when I said that? It was totally wrong. Like, here's what we should do. Like, nobody was owning ideas to the point where they were just fighting to the past the point where they should. And it's hard to do, I think, when you're younger too, because you're less secure. Maybe you don't have success under your belt. I came into that company with an IPO under my belt, and I made a little bit of money, and so I think I felt more secure than I would have like 10 years before. So if you're young and you're still trying to get that first one under your belt, be self-aware and don't be dogmatic.